Okay, good evening everybody and welcome to the Quaker Meeting House. My name is Gavin McDougall from Luath Press, or Luath Press. We're delighted to welcome you to the Edinburgh launch of Alison Lang's new book, title in Gaelic being
Balach Beag, dh'Èisteadh aig Dorsan.
So we're here tonight for the launch of Alison's fifth book, Balach Beag, dh'Èisteadh aig Dorsan, The Little Boy Who Listened at Doors. This is Alison's first novel, published by Luath Press, and it's the second novel in a new series called Fiction Luath. Luath in Gaelic means fast as well, so we're quite fortunate that this is part of the relatively quick growth in Gaelic fiction that we've seen over the last 20 years. On the chai hiet Luath kainch na Gaelic culture, Ailshigh and some tre Urskil and in Davila ha Alison chlú vorachosnig mar skriveter le skilachin garich, novelin na helco garich, drama, scriptichin, lirvisin, alton, agus, amismikig, stock grey, bardachin in grey, nachterein hast, hachicha in hast. So since Alison's first book, Kainch na Gaelic culture, was published in 2009 in the Urskil series, Alison had become very well known as a writer of short stories, novellas, slightly longer novels, drama, scripts, reviews, articles, and I think that poetry is perhaps the one genre that she hasn't done yet, but there's still time for that. Haikidja go primar na Jaisihi Gehadich in Tre Lasa, tron hire taik a horst, agus spianig a horst, do gimtig skrive to the nailer. So Alison also works, or has worked, as an editor, especially on the Lasak series, through which she's supported a lot of other Gaelic writers. Tronopper Atkinsa et Cornleorican, the Meacankig di Torlevited in Gaelic et Hula Ida, vo Lucian Siki gu Filanti, agus a Brian Rumi in fiction, agus be me Cloinchim agus Jehum Moor Saha na Skilachan, agus the Orichan et Alison Cordigru. Agus hamis meichi gavil da overeiners in shin. A huv canon ha Alison skrivergan in style ha gama fyrsta lenten, hannu sin really simply ach really fyrsta a lenten.
Hannu was small in actually.
Agus ha thadgig canon in doin inchinach is fys mura helu ira farveli tukshin a hula fatal how the tukshin and suichi von the hohexa. So I think through my work at the Gaelic Books Council, I meet a lot of Gaelic readers at all levels, from beginners up to fluent speakers, and speak to them about the fiction that they read. And something that I hear over and over again is how much Alison's books, how much they enjoy Alison's books. And there are two reasons for that. One is that Alison writes in a style that's very simple to follow. Not that it is simple, but it's simple to follow. And the way that she uses the language means that even if you don't understand every word, you can understand what's going on from the subtext. Agus na skidrumi commission ha na skilachan a gincha ma ha taringa yelanta agus inchinach agus the character and ha biol agus fear agus ha skriva here meiskehu di cusperin agus a coited until and doyen etrielicha marakishin anok. So the other reason is that she writes good stories, basically. They're very engaging and interesting, with characters that are very true to life, and she deals with a lot of different situations and looks at the world in different ways, which leads us neatly onto the book we're going to be discussing tonight. So, can you Michigal Corin Drasta Hamidal Yudir Alison Beck and Inshigin, Miyin and Balach Beag, dh'Èisteadh aig Dorsan.
Thank you for that introduction, for saying such nice things, or for telling me that the readers you need to say such nice things. Or Uadalin, how skriva butigan, dh'Èisteadh aig ha muyin shin, gus hanna kala gisakid. What do people think of this? And I'd love to know, give me a bit of feedback. So, dún yn ma y coinching image, as had na fros na Google, sto skrif there's a deal in it, ma chwingus if you hear that people are enjoying your work, that's a real fillip. That encourages you to write the next one and the next one, to keep on going. So, Shaw and Leor Asura, Balach Beag dh'Èisteadh aig Dorsan, the little boy who listened at doors, agus sé scale my yin scale. It's a story about stories. Because the little boy hears stories, some of which are told to him. Sit down, Norrie, I'm going to tell you a story. Sé Taramat ahead. His name's Taramat, or Norman. Agus a severe la hamigran Norrie. So in English I'm calling him Norrie, in Gaelic we call him Taramat. Sit down, Norrie, and I'll tell you a story. Some sin ha kucha scale, ha scale ganilla farabeleri farhuish, skapachorga dh'Èisteadh. These are stories he's not supposed to hear. These are little fragments and snippets of other people's views and opinions. Agus hamar mixture, it's like a jigsaw. There are little bits of a puzzle all over the place, and you don't get, if all you do is you go around listening to snippets of other people's stories, you don't get the whole picture, but maybe eventually you do. Agus sin na seosa clésa an fiach an sin nóir. Ha scéal mór siimplí ann, agus sin go bhfuil Taramat a fuireach an a Balach Beag ilan lí a bheathair. He lives with his mother, she's a single parent. We don't know who or where his father is. Agus sin a chéist fór a haig críe na novel. Is Taramat going to discover this? Is somebody going to tell him? Or is this information going to come to him in some muddled way through the stories that he hears? In one case, Rory tells him a story about a man who is carried off by a press gang. And he says, and Norrie asks him, what was the man's name? He says, oh, I don't know, Ian. But we can't say his name was Ian unless his name really was Ian. Oh, I can't quite remember, but the story will be no less true if we give the main character a different name. But won't it though? So how talkish mushit ek tama? Mother ha mi smilhu ek call and especially how do you put yourself in the mindset of a 9-year-old boy? Well, I have a 9-year-old nephew, but he wasn't 9 yet when I wrote this, so I can't really refer to him. But I think we all remember what it's like. In some way, we remember half understanding things and maybe reaching a point where we think, oh, I had that wrong. And then you learn something that changes your idea of it. So I wanted the central character, Taramat or Norrie, to be at a point where he can still be quite innocent. And this is set in maybe the 1980s or thereabouts, or 70s-ish. I'm not quite sure exactly when, but before the internet, before mobile phones, when it was probably still possible for a child not to know about things they didn't need to know about yet, and to invent all sorts of fanciful things that might explain the gaps. The gaps that the history books aren't going to teach him, that the adults around him don't want to tell him about.
Yeah, sin in case you back and you who derivs a high if you a really comisach do gyn some be a $4 and is it really possible for anybody once you've passed that level of innocence to ever go back to and to really imagine things?
I don't know. Because if it isn't possible to imagine yourself in somebody else's shoes, we would have no fiction. But on the other hand, everybody's memory is unreliable in some way. And I wouldn't like someone to read this and say, that's an absolutely unbelievable, I didn't believe that person could even have existed. That would be a terrible outcome if anyone read it and thought that. But on the other hand, there's a slightly surreal element to some of the stories. And when I conceived the stories, they were going to be a lot more surreal. There was going to be a kind of magic realism aspect to it, which never really emerged because this I know it sounds so pretentious and literary to say this in a way that the story leads you where it wants to go, the characters dictate what must happen, but it's absolutely true. You set off thinking we're going to write this thing and the story finds its own way. And a lot of the stories that were going to have a much more surreal aspect to them ended up becoming, I don't want to say more mundane, but more grounded somehow, as if they could be something that really happened. Not in a folk tale in which magical things happen, but in a world where people have superstitions and believe that astonishing things are possible.
I think Hope poing gyda inchyn mean biolarish, agus na scialachan sin, agus mar vis duine she scialachan, passing down stories through different generations through folklore, and there is a bit more freedom within that style to change stories. Agus I'm lítrachas na Gaelic siúd gyma úrahain bhí scríbh scialachan sias and actually inche scialachan. It's relatively new in Gaelic to be writing stories down instead of telling them.
To be writing them in the sense that we're talking about fiction with an identifiable author, rather than ethnographic collections of folklore made by ethnographers, of which there are lots. I was reading some of the tales of the West Highlands, which have very faithfully recorded what various informants said. And some of these stories are fascinating, and a lot of them conform to the archetypes, the structures of myths that we're familiar with from all sorts of European folklore. And in fact, the notes that Campbell makes at the end of each story say that this is like a story recorded by Brothers Grimm, or this is like some other story from Egypt or Turkey or from wherever it's from. But quite often the stories are broken and there's bits missing because whoever, Hector McLaren who told him this story, he didn't remember it properly, or how do we know that the thing he heard was the right thing? And this is something that crops up quite a lot in the book because there is a character in one of Rory's stories who is known as Bard Moore, the great bard or the big bard, because he is physically a big, tall man. And he comes to the village to collect folklore, but he doesn't really tell people that that's what he's about. Hadol a misk and botoch with his bottle of whiskey, he gets them to sing all their songs, and they sing all night long in the Cayley house. Agus an náwa, ha es in a skrivig shias gna shonta, gra na horsted. But he doesn't say, please sing me your song because I'd like to write it in my book. He just says, oh, sing me your song. Oh, I'd love to hear that song again. And so bit by bit, he's gathering all these verses until he's got his book full. And eventually he admits to people in the village that this is his project. But by then he has stolen the songs out of their mouths. And when he publishes his book, some people are outraged by the liberties that he's taken, or by the fact that he's got something wrong, but who's to say it was the Bard Moore who got it wrong? So this is something that Rory keeps coming back to. What's true and what's not true, and who's to judge?
It's interesting talking about that and about who owns stories. I guess Alison like Brian Levy and Jason Latin. Alison and I were at a reading group this morning, and one of the questions that was asked of Alison, and that I'm sure is asked of a lot of writers, is to what extent do you use the conversations that you hear around you or people that you know in your books? Agus sé céist model to him. It's a kind of moral question.
It definitely is, and of course I was thinking this is Richard's reading group. They're reading they're reading my first collection of short fiction, and of course afterwards, as I was going home, I was thinking, do you know, actually I said, oh no, I try not to base things on real people, and then I realised, in fact, I was completely contradicting myself, because we had just talked about how the story that's based in the unnamed West African country, that's probably Sierra Leone, was inspired by the arrest of Charles Taylor, the former president of Liberia, and the campaign for the presidency that was running at the time when I went to Sierra Leone 12 years ago now, and that the character, anyone who knows the country will know immediately that this character somehow draws on that, but he's not supposed to be Charles Taylor or Charles Mackay or any of these other politicians, but he is supposed to have elements from all of those. And then there's the character, this is another story in that same book, the Gaelic culture, a character who is obviously Monica Lewinsky, but I called her Miriam Kaminsky, so it's not a stretch to work out who she's supposed to be. But first of all, I don't think Monica Lewinsky is ever going to read my story, and secondly, I'm on her side. she has to live the rest of her life with what happened. Mm-hmm. So yes, you can. I think if you draw on real people, they either have to be big and ugly enough that it doesn't hurt them and that they're not going to sue you, mm-hmm. or they have to be non-identifiable. I don't think it's fair to paint an unflattering portrait of an identifiable person. Even those women on the bus who were chatting very loudly about their problems with addiction. And I just thought, I don't want to hear the conversation about your drug and alcohol problems on the route between Easter Road and Chambers Street. But I got the whole thing loud and clear, and so did everyone else on the bus. It wouldn't be fair to capture a conversation like that and write it down. But
they probably don't have Gaelics.
Well, they probably don't. But it was strange that the question was asked this morning at the reading group, and then that happened on my bus journey back into town this afternoon. So,
Greening Balach Beag, agus an dóim san bhí na scéalcha na Gaelic trochíte, ba mír sin fáinne cúideach an de Gaelic a novel sin trochíte. So in the same way that folklore changes throughout time, as Alison did her novel change as she wrote it.
I think it did. Mae'n rhaid i gra, fa sé hiad smóin a bachan, gymig na sgéalch gan fa ni, gymig gach sgéal a siesw leis hyn, agus etar gach sgéal, big pís meaning ruari agus tarmat agus pegi mahar aramach. But then, as in scribble, in the writing of it, the barriers between the stories and the sort of linking narrative merged, and it became a much more, it flowed together a lot more. So the level of surrealism settled down a bit, mm-hmm. and the integrity of the story, I think, the stories merged into one another in such a way that it became not so much a collection of linked stories as a novel. Mm-hmm. So I think in that sense it did become a novel, mm-hmm. not quite in the way I had imagined it to begin with. But as I said, in this sort of strange way that writers talk about their work as if it's a living creature, it decided what it wanted to become.
Mm-hmm. So you've actually translated the whole novel into
English?
I
have, yes. And having done that and pored over it and gone over it many, many times and told myself that it was finished and sent it to Gavin saying it was finished, when I looked at this again in preparation for today, I thought, oh no, I want to change that. I want to change that. I don't like that. And so some bits of it still feel very translated. And I think it might just be the case that if I were to leave it for a month or so and look at it again, it wouldn't strike me that way. Or it may be that it needs another pass, just to anglicise it, anglify it properly, and make it its own work of art in English, rather than it needs to acquire a degree of independence from its Gaelic origin, I think. And it might just not quite be there yet.
It's interesting though, we were saying earlier that obviously your first language is English, but this was written
In
in Gaelic originally, and now you're translating it back into your first language.
Yes, it's like a sort of self-contained game of Chinese whispers. And it is quite strange to encounter something I've written in Gaelic and think, I don't know how to put English onto that. And sometimes it's just because the structure doesn't lend itself readily to the translation. And you can be quite free with it. Some things like a song, how do you translate a song, particularly if it's a song that means something, that a Gaelic speaker, a real song that a Gaelic audience understands and recognises, but an English audience has never heard of? Do you simply substitute a different song altogether that they will have heard of? Do you try a faithful translation? Do you try do you try to rhyme? Do you try to... There are all sorts of ways of approaching that. And that's just a few lines out of a song. You've then got to think about how the rest of the narrative works. Do you change the names? So I toyed with not changing their names, and in the end I decided, no, Taramat and Rurnich will become Nori and Rachel. So in the English version, some people have English names, but Rory is still Rory, and Seamus is still Seamus. And I suppose every word you write is a choice, and then every word you translate is another set of choices.
Yeah.
There's a really interesting thing at the moment. I don't know if any of you follow Vagabond Voices, which is an independent publisher based in Glasgow. They have started doing a series of podcasts about translation, about literary translation. So I think they're up to podcast 2 or 3 now. It's only just started. But it's interesting to see, and of course Alan Cameron, who runs Vagabond, is a translator of literary and historical works from Italian into English. So he started as a translator before he was a publisher, but he also, I don't know how much Gaelic he understands or speaks himself, but his wife is a Gaelic speaker, and his son is a Gaelic speaker, so he better picked up some Gaelic along the way.
He does.
He does, right. Maga, Alan Cameron and Vagabond Voices. So it's worth having a look at their website and tuning into the podcast, because I think they're addressing some quite interesting issues about literary translation and how work from different markets plays into other countries. You know, people think, well, genre fiction in this genre doesn't really sell in Hungary, or people don't want romance novels in China, or whatever. And yet, a lot of these things are assumptions that haven't really been tested properly. But if you're going to put all the effort into translating literature, you want to know there's a market out there. You'd like to believe there's a market out there. And perhaps there are some language combinations that just no one's gone there yet, because they haven't established that there's a desire for it among the readership. But then that's a question we talk about all the time. We need lots of readers, and there are bound to be more people out there than are currently reading a Gaelic book. So, but then of course Luath has published novels in both languages, in Mian and Ashik. The Girl on the Ferry Boat was published, I think, simultaneously, was it?
Written simultaneously as well.
Written and published simultaneously in both languages. So we haven't really explored that style of publishing, of putting 2 versions out at once to a great extent yet. So I guess we've just got to keep trying new things.
There are German translations of Gaelic as well
There
don't
yes,
exist in English,
of course,
so that's
yes.
quite
So
nice to
we
see.
have and Quaker Meeting House, the first volume of that was translated into German, wasn't it? Of which I have a copy at home which I can't read. But alas, my story was in volume 2, so mine is not among those translated yet. So maybe that's the next job for me and Claven House to translate them. Oh gosh, there's a question. I think
maybe it's just the same plots.
Plots, yes. I think it's maybe less about a character and more about a situation. So, for example, I was thinking, I'm interested in writing, and I have lots and lots of ideas that are just post-it note, wouldn't this be a good idea? And then I'll read that again in a month's time and not know what on earth it meant. But say that I have an idea, I'd like to write about someone who believes in conspiracy theories. So they believe that the CIA and the Illuminati are causing everything that goes wrong in the world. And then something tragic happens to them that has very obvious, mundane, criminal reasons behind it, but they can't separate themselves from the mindset that it's all part of this great big master plot. And what would it be like to put the character in that situation? But having thought of that scenario, I don't know who that person is yet. I don't know whether that's a man or a woman or old or young or who the person is that the tragic thing happens to, but I've sort of got the idea that one day, if I live to be 300 years old, I might get round to tackling that because I think it's an interesting concept. But on the other hand, well, there's a story in Cainch na Gaelic Culture, the first collection, about a woman who does not get caught in a terrorist attack. But on the day when it happens, she allows everyone to believe that she's been killed, and she walks away and invents herself again with a new identity. And just leaves everyone in her old life behind. So that was based on the idea, I think I had read something about, there was a man who died in the King's Cross fire, and he wasn't identified for years and years until they made one of those forensic reconstructions, and one of his relatives recognized him from this face that they had managed to make. And it was someone who had become estranged from his family and he'd been living in London and he'd been sleeping rough, and he was the last person who remained to be identified. And it took a long, long time to find out who he was. And around the same time, I read something about people who go missing and are never found again, and who just walk away, and maybe people look for them, maybe they ask the Salvation Army or the police to help them find them, and somehow they just disappear. So it's less, I think, that I choose a character or choose a plot, but the confluence of various ideas suggests something that eventually becomes a story. Ha raibh dé ha mi scríomh, leis an leor seo, bheith ón scéal ann a bheith scríobte agus déise buchionata, agus feisiid an scéal ma dhéanamh a bharst mhór. A hánig in a bheile agus a gut na náran. Leis an scríobte is bheith seasú leis héin go íle bheith. And then the bit about the tweed. Se rudile ha cútcin a scéal ag an het a táisiú, agus ha písce in ínseo, as an ocean had scéal a dom rascú bethe láithil haramach. Agus an capital ile ha si a tíbig gan a scéal ag sin. Agus le cútcin a scéal ag an sin, ba fisach an catch an big an scéal ag a dol, ach le fiúin ile scríb me as fan is minnig right okay, so sin iain an isht a horst an brúd leis a fascan, leis a frascan, ta a borst na loinge, ach han a liscan dé hachas, yeah. So a vihisht ha réir dé han i scríbig, leis an leor seo a pís in ie an scríbig swan, agus no sé an fit in a seach, ach a pís in ele ie, a chaibel hosio, go grích. The stories, there are elements of all the stories that have some resonance with Termits, the big question of who his father is. So there are stories about people who go away and don't come back. There's a real story about Rory's son who joins the army and at first seems to be happy, and then he just sort of drifts off, and we don't really know what's gone wrong to prompt his going off the rails in this way. Agus ha scéal ag an ile mar iain, the press-ganged sailor, who, when he comes home, But when he comes back after his first 2 years at sea, he's determined that he'll go and see his wife, because he just disappeared one day and she has no idea where he went. And he doesn't make it home. He runs out of money, someone offers him another job and he goes back to sea. So it's even longer before he comes back. So every attempt to come back is somehow thwarted. And all of these stories have some hints in them about what might have happened to the man who might be Taramat's father. But we don't know, and Taramat himself doesn't know, and to a certain extent his age and his innocence makes him misconnect the things he knows, to draw this big conclusion, that must be it, and then think, but he knows enough to know that he shouldn't just go and say, Mummy, who's my dad? Because he doesn't want to hurt his mother's feelings either. So I wanted him to be around about that age where a child is aware that there are things they're not getting told, but also aware that it's probably the wrong time to ask, and to leave him to work it out for himself. Norrie and Rory were the characters who existed in the first story about a Bard War. So when that first story was written, it was a story being told by Rory to Norrie. And then I had the idea that this should be only one of many stories that were told. And so then what has to emerge is what's the relationship between the old man and the little boy, and who are the other people in his life, and what's his school like, and what are his teachers like, and where are they? Because all we know from that story is that they're in a little village somewhere. And so, yes, the rest of it had to grow from there, but I think because that one, which appears about halfway through, trying to think where it actually appears, that story is about halfway through, and it was the first one that was complete. And then the rest of Shalamat's life had to grow up around that, I think. I guess Gaelic and thank you all for coming.